Alrighty, so good morning, good morning, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Abhijit Podwal, the Chief Marketing Officer at Amrut Software, and I welcome you for a great fireside chat session for our journey to Atlassian Cloud. Though we couldn't host you in person this time due to the COVID protocol, we thought of meeting you virtually, but ensuring to host you soon in your city. So this is our fifth session with Scott in last 3 years, and the content of the session just helps us to deliver better value on Atlassian stack year on year. We hope to make this session a successful one with your help on engaging with the speakers and the content built especially for your DevOps needs. While the adoption of this tool speaks the number for itself, but for the starters, we collected data from over 130 customers, and we have seen a month-on-month growth of an insane 120% in its adoption. The reason that we learned, while doing this exercise, the reason the companies and the enterprise and the teams are going for it is because the overall efficiencies of the team have shot over 45% in the first quarter and over 60% for successive quarters, thereby ensuring seamless collaboration within various IT teams from services to maintenances. Now, the core of any business is profitability, productivity, and market share. But these are not just enough in today's day. Enterprises want to know about effectiveness, efficiencies, customer experience, and everything about it. So let's make this session an interactive one with questions pouring in from your end, and let us help you build better processes. So here is our narrative. Why are enterprise customers moving away from server? Why should you move from server to cloud? TCO, the total cost of ownership, a metric every leader today is accounted for, and how Atlassian and Amrut software can assist you in a seamless manner. So we would begin this wonderful journey where our own CTO, Vishwajit, fondly called as Vishwa, would take you through conventional and contemporary approach on how companies can adopt the DevOps culture. And more importantly, if you're already there, that means we have adopted that culture, then why and how should you consider moving from server to cloud? And on the other side, we have our dear friend, Scott from Atlassian. Well, Scott's love to speak about developing great software teams and generate higher efficiencies. Whatever your industry, you learn how high performance teams use Atlassian tools to embrace a change and cultivate collaboration and balance the autonomy individuals that crave while delivering the visibility management needs. And ladies and gentlemen, before we begin this session, let me take a moment and talk about some exciting offers and prices that will take over the session course. Yes, you heard it right. We would launch special offers with the help of your engagement meter. So basically what we have done is in the background, we've got this an algorithm-based tool that will help us to understand and reveal the right size offer for your teams and org size by the end of the show. So the base of this algo is you just have to keep on hitting questions and like to reach the max disco meter. Hang on, we're not going to dance here. So when I say disco meter, it's not about a disco, but we're calling it as a discount meter, right? So cheers, and over to you, Scott and Vishwa.
Yeah, thank you, Abhijit, for that lovely introduction and warming up the audience pretty well and setting up the stage for me and Scott to take things ahead. So glad to have you, Scott, on this edition of Fireside Chat. As much we would have loved to have you in a physical event, but we are constrained to have this online due to ongoing situation. So a quick recap on Atlassian Cloud adoption seems to be accelerating from the last 6-8 months is what we have noticed as partners. So as we are approaching the sunset of server support, so we keep getting many questions from our customers and prospects alike. Though as much customers are kicked up to adopt the cloud as a platform, but there are many questions which they want answers to. With this fireside chat with Scott, who heads solution engineering at APAC, We will try to answer many such questions and much more. Please feel free to use Q&A section to send in your questions, and we promise to cover as many as possible at the end. So without further ado, let me just kickstart these questions. So Scott, first and foremost question which comes to customers' mind: how do we go about planning our journey to Atlassian Cloud? As there are customers who have systems running for many years, complex environments with integrations and with a lot of customizations. So can you just throw in some light on that?
Yeah, sure. And just firstly, I'll break character a little bit and say, for those of you who are on early, you saw a little bit of an impromptu chat between both sides here. Very open in terms of how we work with not only our customers, but our partners. And you saw a genuine exchange. I didn't know we were live, but you can see a little bit behind the scenes in terms of how we truly value a lot of our key partners in the region. In particular, organizations like Amrut. And yeah, I've had many trips out to India in the past. Actually, when COVID first started up, one of the first trips I had to cancel was to India, and I was gutted having to do it because I was definitely ready to go back. We've talked to a number of customers jointly over the years in terms of how best to migrate to cloud. To get to the heart of Vishwa's question, we definitely have a number of documents and best practices that we can share with everybody that we make available on our website in terms of really the full set of best practices that are outlined for making that type of migration. So all of that, and we can send these links in follow-ups to make sure that you have access to those directly. All of that's accessible today. If you have a user base with our existing products on-prem and you're over about the 1,000 user mark, you can also reach out to Amrut and or Atlassian directly. And we're happy to give you a little bit more of a guided tour through that on what that looks like. We can bring to bear additional resources in terms of how additional analyses and individual people who can really kind of shepherd your way through that process would work, because those larger migrations tend to be a bit more complex. And that runs the gamut from everything from starting on how to assess your current state to launching and all the steps in between. There is a bit of analysis and pre-work and cleaning along the way. I like to think of it as almost like pre-cleaning before you move to a new home. So we have a lot of resources there. And yeah, I would say definitely start at that point firstly.
Sure. I think a lot of pre-work, as Scott, you highlighted, a lot of pre-work is needed to be done. So you don't have to really wait for the last minute to actually start planning.
No, that's exactly right. In fact, the analysis phase is even more important in my mind than actually moving the data across. Because if you don't really put a lot of thought into what's there, especially for customers that have had instances, multiple instances, of JIRA, of Confluence on site for quite some time. If you just lift and shift that across, you're just carrying a bunch of cross of mess. You want to make sure that you really understand how and why things are used, tidy that up a bit, standardize configurations, validate that the same add-ons need to be used, and as we'll get to in a bit, drawing the counterparts to how that may or may not exist on the cloud or how things may be done better. But that really speaks to why the analysis phase is really more important, especially since actually moving the data, we have pretty well automated through a bunch of migration tools. So I'd focus less on actually getting the bits across and more on analyzing what you have there as your current state.
Yep. I think that's a key takeaway, is that the planning is, I think, the most important part. So moving may be not so much complicated if you plan well in advance. So my follow-up on that question would be, I think a lot of customers also are really curious in terms of the timelines, right? So we know that there's no one size fit all, but we have seen migrations happening in a couple of months, and there are migrations which takes almost a year around. So how does a typical cloud migration roadmap looks from the customer point of view? And also a lot of customers want clarity on what they are getting into, right? So I think that's one of the things. At times this can be a complicated question to answer, but if you can give just some pointers around that.
Yeah, sure. So from my chair and the customers that we typically talk to really across the APAC region, the very broad general, perhaps overgeneral guidance that we give to customers is just to give you a rough idea on what you should be budgeting for a migration project. You're probably looking at first blush in the 6 to 9 month range, like just to get your head around, it's not going to be a couple of weeks, it's probably going to be a few months. However, we have documentation around that, as I mentioned, to help you refine that. If it's more of a complex environment, that's where Amroot can step in and really help you double click on those areas as well. I've personally seen, if you can get, it takes a little bit of constellation alignment, but if you can get all the right parties and all the right processes and all the right individuals aligned, I've seen this fairly significant migration occur inside of 1 month. It's possible, it's rare, but it's possible. I've also seen some bigger, more complex enterprise organizations take probably more on the order of 12 to 14 months. So you've definitely got those extremes, but rough cut, we tell people, hey, don't think you're going to migrate in like a month or two. Think more in terms of 6 to 9, just so you can budget around that.
I think one point I would also want to understand a bit more from the audience point of view, Scott, is that a lot of times what customers find it a bit difficult to basically comprehend that why it's going to take so much of time. So if you could actually throw some light on that, I think that will help audience to make a more a better decision.
Yeah, I think again, that will be refined rather quickly once you get that initial assessment phase done, because you want to look at the collective state of what you've got in place already. You want to take a really close look at the add-ons and extensions and customizations. Those tend to be where all the trapdoors lie, right? So you really have to resolve those unknowns to get a much more refined timeline on what's involved there. But if you've got, and we've got some general guidance around that in terms of what to look for and what the general level of effort is. Obviously, we know that much better for packaged extensions like applications, where it takes a little bit more analysis up front is on any customizations, extensions, anything that's done kind of at API level, because there are some differences between the two platforms. When you're looking at on-prem versus cloud, they do have a common ancestry. They're kind of cousins. The cloud product was actually forked from the server code several years ago now. I think it was about the year before I joined. I've been with Atlassian for 5 years now. So they are kind of related, but they are distinct product code lines, and they have different APIs, different ways of extending at this point. And so you can't simply just take what you had on-prem and just kick that across to the cloud and think it's going to plug in the same way. You need to make sure that you really reassess what the trade-offs are across that. So that's what causes a lot of that variability.
I'm sure that would have actually given some areas to ponder from the customer point of view and give them some clarity, because a lot of time that creates a confusion that, okay, this is the same software we are talking about and why it's going to take so long. So moving on to along the same line, so if you, as you mentioned, right, they're separate code bases, right? So given the difference between the two platforms, what according to you are the key considerations which customers or even we as a partners, right, we have to be cognizant in terms of looking at migrating from server to cloud? UI difference is obviously one obvious thing to notice, but what other areas or gochas or other things, which significant pieces which I think we need to be, or customers need to vary about, and we have to be very cautious in terms of planning a successful journey to the cloud?
Sure. I think there are a few main elements that when we engage in migration discussions with some of our bigger customers that come up straight away. The first one is really doing a thorough InfoSec review, like bringing online your security team. You probably have somebody who's already charged with this. I imagine that you're using other SaaS products as well. So you've probably got a tick list, especially if you're in a regulated environment like government or banking. You probably have a team that's going to want to be across this and really understand what our SaaS environment looks like, what boxes and certifications and other questions do they have to resolve before they're comfortable with it. And that can take a while. I've seen, just because of all of the rigor around that, I've seen those take weeks to months. So usually on day one, when we're talking to the business owner or the JIRA admin, our guidance is, hey, straight away, let's find out who that individual is. Let's engage them. Let's get them the right documentation to get that process moving in parallel, because that can take some time. And we can manage that in addition to all the other different functional areas, some of which you and I have touched on already, just organically, but looking at things like applications and customization assessment and how does that carry across. I mentioned some of the API differences, understanding what is and isn't there and how to actually mitigate a lot of those elements. You mentioned the UI, that's a pretty obvious one. The UI, I think, is pretty cleaned up and streamlined on the SaaS environment. I've actually had some customers say, hey, can we have the cloud UI and bring it on to our data center instance? Doesn't quite work that way. I wish, but not quite. But in addition to the UI itself, you also want to look at user management, because the way in which you configure the product behind the firewall to not only manage just general security, but tie into your IDP or different LDAP processes to manage things like two-factor authentication and SSO. It was very product by product orientated behind the firewall. Whereas in the cloud, it's all done through one common layer called Atlassian Access. So understanding what those differences are, how to activate that, what the downstream effect is in a good way, but just getting your arms around kind of the full scope of what that change means for you. These are all things that we flag on day one, just so you can get a running start on those, because it takes a little while before people, A, kind of internalize it all, and B, get a bit more comfortable with what that shift means. So those are the biggest things that we usually call out.
Just to add that, I think one of the key areas which is easy to miss in my experience is the integrations part, right? So there may be systems, because that may not be really upfront in UI. There may be some background integrations which customers would be typically running through their build servers, or maybe some integration with their internal systems. So what would you like to add on that side of it? How can companies plan for such integrations, which even the team we are talking to may not be aware of? So how can we cover that part?
Well, it's a bit of it depends, because as you know, right, it's case by case. I think this is really where, if you've got a lot of customizations or extensions that are outside of a marketplace add-on, if you've done something on your own using one of the APIs, figuring out how best to carry that across is going to take a lot of domain knowledge. It's going to take somebody who understands both platforms, who knows the different API structures, who could potentially redo and or rewrite it, because that definitely tends to be more the case. You can't just take code that runs on data center and flop it over to cloud. It doesn't quite work like that. I wish it were that simple, but that takes a lot of knowledge across a number of different areas. That's actually where we rely on experts at Amroot to really guide you through that, because there are so many pieces. Yeah, you could take all the courses and learn all that stuff yourself, but that's where the expertise of one of our partners to really surface that for you straight away and let you know the key recommendations is probably the best way to call that out, especially if you've got a lot of customizations. In terms of the add-ons themselves, the migration tooling can help you get a good baseline to understand, hey, you've got these 10 add-ons here. Yes or no, they exist in the cloud. We can even carry some of the data across. What are some of the initial considerations in terms of how you move the data and what the functional differences may or may not be? So we're automating more and more of that. That's getting even better over time. But of course, anything that's done as a customization, it's such a one-off that it just takes somebody with skill and knowledge. It takes a person, it takes an expert to go and then really peel that back.
And I think that's one of the areas also easy to miss as well, right? Because the teams, somebody developed something and moved out of the organization. So I think that 360-degree assessment is very important in terms of how you are using, where you are using, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for just to put it in perspective, for any customers that I or anyone on my team talk to, because we tend to be talking to organizations that have 2,000, 10,000, 50,000 users that are migrating across. If they're not already working with a partner, we have that chat probably in the first discussion. Okay, yeah. Here are the right partners for you to consider, because, and I think out of the last couple of years when we've been doing a lot of these migrations at that tier in earnest, I can only think of once or twice where we let a customer go through without a partner, where they really had the skills and were across it and had the depth that they could put that energy behind it on their own. And we felt comfortable letting them do that. I'd say probably 99% of the time we're tying in a partner to help them with that kind of thing, just to get them across the line anyway. It's a little bit tricky doing it all on your own.
That's I think will give a cue to our prospects and customers alike, right? So because in our experience also, a lot of time customers will try something on their own and then they will burn their hands and come back to us, right? So you could actually spare yourself that pain if you start engaging, because I think the partner ecosystem at Atlassian is very strong, and they genuinely add a lot of value to the whole ecosystem, is what I believe in.
Yep. Yep. And the only thing I'll add to that is bear in mind, this is at the end of the day, a migration. Again, the code shares a common base, but there are two distinct products at this point. When you are moving from server or data center into the cloud, you are actually taking the data through our tooling, taking the data, extracting it, popping it into an instance that we host in our SaaS environment. This isn't, you're not simply just doing an in-place upgrade or anything that's quite that easy. This is a proper migration. Any of us who have been in the industry for a while, who have done migrations in the past, even with the best tooling, stuff changes, stuff breaks, edge cases happen, trickiness occurs, and it's better to have somebody, walk you through that and help minimize that up front versus hitting those bumps on your own.
Yeah, a lot of times I think that reminds me of an interesting conversations which we have. Ours is a very simple instance. So customers do come and say, even our team also say that it's a simple migration. So I think the first thing I just want to clear, it may be simple, it may be not, but there's nothing like a straightforward migration. So if it's straightforward, I think good for everyone, but that's as you said, right? Out of 100% of cases, 99% cases are really not that straightforward. So I think moving on to get bit deeper onto the migration side of it. So I'm sure this is close to Scott's heart and even like pretty close for customers. So because with different customers having different landscapes, some with multiple instances, right? So there are customers who are running, instances even they are not aware of, right? So with all that setups which are there, so how they should plan moving their data, and what are different approaches available to them to migrate? As I said earlier, I'm sure there's no one size fit all, but generally speaking, with customers having multiple instances, looking to merge, consolidate. So if you can just dig a bit deeper on those areas as well, I think that will help.
Yeah, sure. If you think, top level, different types of migration strategies that'll exist probably in any but the simplest of accounts, right? It's pretty rare that I talk to, as I imagine you, Vishwa, somebody who has just like one JIRA instance and one Confluence instance, and they have little to no add-ons. Like I have talked to them, but in 5 years, it's probably been like 3 people. So, it's pretty minimal on that scale. Usually the landscape is a bit broader. And even in one customer, we do have some recommended approaches. But realistically, with a whole federation of behind the firewall installs, you're probably looking at a combination. Usually where we start in those chats is optimize and shift. That's the first recommended strategy. If you've got one JIRA Confluence instance, if you have 5, clean it up, look at the information that you have there, see what you can archive, validate the add-ons, do a little bit of house cleaning first to get that all in order, and see what you can put into that migration pathway and do that in that way. That's not to say that you couldn't also have, because I have seen this too, maybe you have other groups that are smaller, tighter, have had more governance longer, and they've already done all that work effectively. They've already had a good structure in place and they don't really need to do a lot of cleaning. Well, then those you can either lift and shift them across. You can just take that information and pop it across straight away. Or, again, it depends on the nature of the data. Or if this is something where the data doesn't need to necessarily be retained as much, where you don't care about history, if it's temporary marketing events, digital activities, for example, and these are just the teams that we see leaning into the cloud straight away. I've seen some organizations where specific smaller departments just jump the cloud and just like put all their new stuff there. And then, maybe they figure out how to migrate the old stuff on-prem later, or maybe they don't. Depends on what the business requirements are around those deliverables. But you can either kick across straight away, you can optimize and shift, or if it's already cleaned up, you can just lift and shift straight away. You can also, with our migration tooling, if you have a really big instance, even after you've cleaned it up, where you just can't possibly organize, even on a weekend, say, the ability to do that cutover, where you kind of put your on-prem instance into a read-only mode, you migrate all the data across, and then Monday morning, everyone logs in and they have something new. Well, if you have, as we do in the APAC region, if you have, say, a big multi-node Confluence data center set up with 60,000 users and terabytes of attachments, that's kind of tricky to do on a weekend. So you might have to do a phased approach. And you can also do that with our migration tooling as well. If you have 100 different spaces in Confluence, you can do, let's say, 25 at a time across 4 weeks, and you can actually phase that across rather than doing it all as one big bang. So you do have a few different variations, and you can mix and match depending on what your current state looks like as well. So there are a range of options across that, but we always start with optimize and shift. Let's see what we can get across in one go and just clean it up.
Sure. I think that that reminds me of one of the instances of customers, right? So they were planning to move to the cloud, and then when they actually started doing things, they realized that there are business units in the organization already on the cloud. And that we were able to identify, all thanks to Access, the way it works.
Yeah, that's something I wasn't sure if I want to bring that up now or later, Vishwa, honestly, but one of the many reasons why we talk about things like InfoSec reviews and things like access and security differences is because when you trigger our common security layer on the cloud, and this is done, again, for those who aren't familiar, through a layer called Atlassian Access, you can roughly think of it like some of the SSO plugins, or if you know what crowd is on-prem, it's kind of mentally, it fits into that tier. The difference, however, in the cloud, though, is that once you trigger that, it activates for all users on our platform that have your email domain. So kind of what Vishwa was touching on is sometimes you get these rogue departments that have already been using the cloud and IT may not be aware of it. And when you switch on access and you go to grab all those users and make them manage through your corporate IDP, all of a sudden, these instances get like allocated to your organization that you may not even have been aware of. And it raises other discussions too, which actually, when we're talking to those types of companies, we usually have that chat as a, hey, this is a good thing. You want to know that's occurring. Like, that's corporate information that you didn't even know was out there. Now's the time to actually get that under the scope of your control so that you can put appropriate governance around that. But yeah, that is kind of a upshot, and yet another reason why we say look at access early, because that does crop up now and then.
Yeah. So sorry for bringing that up now, but I couldn't hold that thing, which actually we had that experience with one of the customers. Okay, so another area I think which customers are curious about, that now that Atlassian is focusing on diversing into the variants which they are bringing in, right? So that you have standard at one side, and then premium was brought in with all the scalability capabilities. We brought in enterprise as well, right? So so customers are typically thinking that, okay, which is the right variant for me, or what kind of thought process they can actually look at in terms of deciding and picking among all those three options which they have.
Sure. So in true Atlassian fashion, open company, right? All of our pricing is public. All of our security and control documents are public. All of what Vishwa was just touching on, all of the differences in our various cloud tiers are made public as well. So we'll make sure, as a follow-up to this webinar, we get you all the landing pages so you can refer to this. So don't worry about scribbling all this down. I'll just give you like my mental cheat sheet on like what I think are the most important things. It's not exhaustive, and we'll get you the full details around this as well. But when I think across starting to look at the different tiers that we make available in cloud, well, firstly, we have free, right? We like to get people in early. And if you've got up to 10 users, go ahead and start using the cloud straight away. Clearly, we hope to grow that, but we like to get people moving on the cloud sooner rather than later in a variety of different ways. But we have free, standard, premium, and enterprise. So just to get everyone across all those 4 different layers. In terms of differences, I like to consider, firstly, for our enterprise accounts, looking at all the non-functional requirements, all the NFRs, all the ilities, that Vishwa was talking about, right? What about support, reliability, SLAs, storage, those types of things? So on the standard tier, there is no defined SLA. I mean, our SLA is still pretty good, but we don't guarantee it at the standard tier. If you're using it for an organization where you need to have a certain level of guaranteed availability, the first tier that kicks in for us is premium. And at that tier, we provide 99.9% SLA. And on the enterprise tier, that's 99.95. And we have on our roadmap taking that 0.95 to a 0.99. And you can do all the math to figure out, how many minutes per day, per week, per month, and what that equates to. But the key thing to take away there is for premium and enterprise, if you need guaranteed availability, those are the tiers at which we provide it. And these are financially backed guaranteed SLAs. So if we, as the SaaS vendor, breach those SLAs, we'll give you credit back on your bill. So that's how much we stand behind those SLAs as part of that. Storage is an easy one. Storage at the standard tier caps at 250 gig. And that's for all information, attachments, every information in the database, as well as attachments. We remove that cap fully for premium and enterprise. So storage is unlimited. The other big thing for larger organizations is probably less about storage and more about support. So standard tier, you get standard in region, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. support. Premium, you get 24/7 with some better responses on certain tickets, but the best obviously is with the enterprise tier, where you get dedicated 24/7, very fast responses, especially on level 1, level 2 tickets. And so if that's a factor for your company, that's something to have a look at as well. From there, there are a number of functional requirements, but the biggest things that I tend to talk to customers about are look at things like release tracks available only in premium and enterprise. And what that is, for those who aren't familiar, is SaaS environment is great, right? We can patch it, we can tweak it, we can add new functionality. We do it once. It's a shared processing environment. We put it out there. It's available for all of our customers. That's great, except some companies say, hey, you move this, it's usually never this drastic, but just to make an example, you move this button or you added this link, and it's kind of messing up our users because they're not used to that being there, or they don't really know what that means. Could you give us a throttle so we could say, hey, we want to wait a week or a month is the most, before we make that new thing that you've put out there available to our users, so we can get in front of any communications to make them more comfortable with that. That's what we do in the form of what we call release tracks, and that's only available at our higher tiers, so premium and enterprise. Similarly, if you need sandboxes, if you need non-production environments to test changes, same thing, only available in premium and enterprise. And then the last thing I'll call out for some of the big environments that do tend to slot into enterprise, there are additional advantages on number of instances. The pricing model is a little bit different in terms of accommodating that as well. And it also gives you full multi-site administration at that tier also. So those are just the kind of highest of highlights that I would call out. Again, we can send more information on like the full itemized feature differences between those tiers as well. But anything else to add from your side, Vishwa? Those are the ones that kind of jumped off to me.
Yeah, I think Sandbox is, I think, one of the very crucial features because you want to try things out before you really move into the main site, right? I think that's one of the key benefits which I think our customers who are on premium have been having, because in server, typically any customer, enterprise customers would have 3 environments, right? They will have basically a dev, and they will typically have basically integration or UAT, whatever they would want to call it. And then there will be a production environment. I think Sandbox is a very important layer for many of the customers, I think, in terms of the value which they are looking from. And I think premium and enterprise is definitely a go for people who are really looking at Sandbox. And release tracks, actually, as you added, I think is a very important feature as well, that you get to choose what your users are actually. So because a lot of time, people need time to actually switch to a different way of doing things, right? So I think Atlassian, being a very innovative company, they keep on bringing in a lot of features and functionalities and changing things. But at times, not everybody is happy with those changes. So I think that window gives them a time to adopt and have a communication internally.
Yeah, I think most people have come to expect that. Again, we all use a number of different SaaS products, right? Like, for example, we also use Gmail. And, when Gmail comes out with a new feature, and I don't know what it looks like on the admin side for us, but, we see those features more or less straight away, but we're accustomed to that. We're used to seeing that UI change. That doesn't bother us too much. But yeah, for some people, change isn't always as much of a positive thing for them. So you just have to have a little bit of control and throttling over that so that you can kind of pre-warm them to that idea.
Yeah.
And that's what those release tracks do as well.
Yeah. That's, I think, really great.
Mm.
So another area primarily from the license point of view, and because there are customers who have, say, for example, a few months to a couple of years because of this sunset of server which is planned. A lot of customers actually renewed for multiple years, right? So how Atlassian is helping them in terms of testing the waters before they actually take the plunge? What kind of support is provided in terms of for those customers who still have a decent window available in their licensing, which validity in terms of validity? So what are the different support which Atlassian is bringing for those customers who are still thinking through and still have a valid license going on?
Yep. So in fact, I'll cut right to the heart of the matter that I think is being described there too, and basically say, hey, Atlassian, we already paid up on things. We're keen on cloud, but we don't want to pay for more licenses to actually have a look at that. I think is really the crux of the scenario that's coming up here, because again, we have these chats. There are a couple different ways in how to operationalize this. Again, Amrut or Atlassian, happy to walk you through on what it looks like for your specific current license profile. But suffice it to say on this webinar, the fact that when you're keen to look at cloud, regardless of whether you've got like a year or just a couple of months left, we can incorporate cloud migration trial dual licensing that allows you under your current support entitlement to have a look at cloud without having to double pay for it. So let's say, for example, I've got a few months left on data center. Scott just said early in the call, we should be looking at 6 to 9 months. Hey, Atlassian, like, what can I do? I want to have a good go at this in earnest. What can I do without having to pay for another set to migrate 2,000 users? Well, in that particular scenario, actually, we allow you right now, and in fact, this is like a special thing that we're running until the middle of May, as long as you've got at least 60 days of maintenance left on your current license as of today, and as long as you apply for a cloud migration trial between now and May 15th, we'll actually give you 12 months. We'll re-up your current license on-prem and give you a free license up to the same tier of users for the cloud, so that you can really have a serious look at evaluating that. And it also gives you probably more than enough runway to actually bring that information across and migrate those users. So we try to make it as frictionless as possible so that you don't have to worry about double paying or doing anything weird procurement wise, just to have a look at our cloud environment. Again, if you want more information on that, just to get across the specifics for how that looks for your full licensing profile, chat to Amrut, reach out to one of the enterprise advocates at Atlassian. We'll get you some specific information, but dual licensing is a core component of our cloud migration trials to ease that.
And that, I think that window gives a reasonable time to customer also get accustomed to the way cloud works and how their data actually looks in. Because a lot of times the customers are curious about the structures which they have created on server environment, how it's going to look like, are they going to get same set of reports, right, dashboards and all those kind of things. And I think parallelly, probably working for some time gives them that confidence that, okay, this is how my data is going to look into the new structure or new scheme of things. And I think that builds a confidence. And
Exactly right. Yeah, and that's what we try to give more than enough runway to make that happen, whether it's for exploring the new UI, doing the actual migration, assessing some of the differences that we were talking about earlier. Having 12 months for most customers, like the vast majority of customers, should be more than adequate amount to make that happen in.
Yep. So another extension on the licensing side of it only, as we talked about the free licensing and all. So a lot of customers are always curious in terms of the return on investment, right? And TCO, as Abhijit was mentioning when he started this chat. So a lot of customers want to understand in terms of what it's going to cost them. Also, a lot of people feel still that cloud may be expensive for them. So I would like you to throw some light around that, on what all aspects. It's like it's like comparing apple and oranges, right? So maybe I would want you to just put some things in perspective a bit from the customer point of view when they are doing the comparison of the two variants.
Yeah, I think you're right, because obviously we go through this too, especially at larger tiers. You know, it is a new pricing model. It is a new product line pricing model. Once you get beyond all the security checkpoints and functional differences and map out your migration plan, that it's, and even taking advantage of the dual licensing, right? At some point you have to have that chat that says, hey, we were paying X, now we have to pay Y, you know, in year 2, year 3, and so on. And so what does that look like, and why are there differences at Atlassian? I think when you're starting to do that assessment up front, a couple of things. Firstly, bear in mind, again, this is a proper SaaS environment. And what that means is that we are taking on a lot of the operational burden as part of our cost structure. And that's why that pricing model is different. You know, for example, we make our environment available on top of Amazon Web Services, on top of AWS. So we pay for that. All those EC2s and EBSs and all those things that we spin up to make our application available, that's a sunk cost for us. That's baked into the model. We have staff that maintains that. You know, we have a number of things that wrap around that in terms of how we continue to make that SaaS environment available. Those are a lot of things that each of you today are doing on a much smaller scale for every one of your behind the firewall instances. So when you move to cloud, we're taking on a lot of that. You know, we're assuming the operations, we're doing patches, upgrades, mitigating security factors on a number of different things. There's cost to that, right? There's infrastructure, there's people, there's time. And so that's why that price difference needs to be accounted for upfront. So you're right. Otherwise, it can look a little bit apples to oranges. You have to make sure you compare the right fruits across that, right? There are some basic calculators that we make available online just to help you itemize some of what that looks like. And again, if you need detailed comparisons specific to your environment, if it's really complex, if you've got a lot of add-ons, if you've got some different terms around that that make it a bit trickier to calculate, at the enterprise tier of customers, we have those conversations quite a bit, and we've got spreadsheets that us can work on to help map that out as well, just to get you comfortable to have that cost center holder, you know, executive level conversation in terms of, you know, this is why that cost is ideally breaking even, or actually potentially saving money in some instances because of other costs that you can eliminate by virtue of moving to the cloud. So I would start there. That's usually most of what we start to prorate and account for upfront. The last thing that I'll mention too is, again, we provide a lot of information out there on our pricing and all these different approaches, and even the TCO calculator that I was just mentioning. However, there might be some things unique to your environment, given a number of different factors, where there could be different point in time credits or discounts or other things that don't show up on a standardized web page. So if you're really keen to get kind of indicative pricing, again, have a chat to one of the two of us and we can help you nail that down as well. So think of what's online as like the high water mark. You know, there's a chance that we might be able to hammer that down, or at least smooth out that ramp over the first couple of years, which is generally what I've seen happen, just so you can get more comfortable with making that transition as you get accustomed to us taking over some of that capability and the costs around it.
Yeah, and I think one of the key areas is that the IT support team which you have to maintain, right? So because if you have to keep the lights on, so you don't have to really worry about keeping that lights on. You can sleep, your IT team can sleep peacefully, your internal stakeholders can sleep peacefully, because Atlassian is already taking care of that part.
Because we're the ones getting beat up. Yeah.
Sure. Yep. So I think moving on to another very important aspect, which can't be stressed enough, is the security, right? So those self-hosted setups are prone to security incidents, but there is a general belief that on-prem systems are more secure. So Scott, why don't you help customers understand a bit on how Atlassian is ensuring the platform security, and what are various initiatives taken also to secure the app which are available through Marketplace?
Yeah, sure. And it's an interesting paradox, right? And I think we've seen this a number of different times as more and more major products make that move into a SaaS environment, where some of us who have been used to using applications behind a firewall, you just, because you can touch it and feel it, there's this like tangible, like it must be safer because I can control it. And by extension, somehow I must be able to control it better than other people. But I don't think we have to dig too far into the news to understand where that might not necessarily be true. You know, just because it's behind a firewall, hackers can get into a lot of places and still cause trouble with different security related issues. So let's start to bend that arc on that front. Like every other SaaS vendor, we are naturally hyper-focused on security, right? If there's a CVE, if there's an incident, if there's anything that affects our cloud platform, it A, impacts all of our customers potentially, and B, is usually something newsworthy, right? You know, think of when Slack had a slight outage recently, that was all over the place. Amazon, if they have an issue with one of their regional centers, even with all the redundancy built in, this is stuff that makes the news. This is not news we want to be attached to, right? So we put a lot of energy and focus and resources and dedicated teams specifically on security in our cloud environment. The other thing that I'll call out again, I mentioned it a moment ago, is the fact that our cloud platform is built on AWS, is built on Amazon Web Services. I suspect many of you probably build applications on Azure or AWS as well. I'm just a bit more familiar with Amazon. Just like for your own applications, we inherit the same controls and shared security model that you may have had to deal with as part of building your own apps there. And we extend that using publicly documented controls that we make available for all of you to see. So you can see all the app-specific pieces of information. There are these lovely CAIQ spreadsheets that have, no joke, hundreds of lines of information that will flood your security team with all the information they want to see to get across that for an InfoSec review, as well as all the certifications that we can tick the box on as well. Across which we also have a number of other ongoing compliance and certifications and bug bounty programs and a number of different ways to proactively stay in front of things, as Vishwa called out earlier. So that's kind of the part A of that answer that I would give. Along the lines specifically of that kind of false perception of behind the firewall being more secure, interestingly enough, for a lot of us on this call, many of which might have used like JIRA or Confluence in particular, all you have to do is think back to the Log4j CVE that came out in December. And the only thing that I'll mention on this call is by the point in time that we put out our initial perspective on that, and we're giving guidance to our behind the firewall customers, we had already patched it in the cloud. It was done. Cloud customers didn't have to do anything. In fact, the quote that went out for all those customers was, and I've got it in front of me here, Atlassian customers are not vulnerable. These are cloud customers, and no action is required. So yeah, how much better is it than that, right? Everyone else is scrambling to figure out how to mitigate a CVE. Our cloud environment was like, done, next question.
Oh, definitely. I think that's one of the key areas, because once you have the centralized control, you can actually help customers in much better manner. So I think we are now left with last 10 minutes. So before I jump into the questions, Scott, I would just like to you to talk a bit about the product roadmap, because a lot of customers also curious about what to expect, say 6 to 9 months, we talk about migration, right? So a lot of customers also want to understand if there's something is not there today, maybe available tomorrow, or maybe in a short span of time. And along with that, maybe you just bit to touch upon on the access, I think, which we talked a bit earlier as well, but maybe just we can quickly do that. Then I think I would love to take all those questions. We have already buzzing Q&A.
Yeah, I do want to get to some of the questions I can see on the panel here that a few have come up while we're talking. So I'll probably make this a bit briefer. I don't want to take away from that, but just to double click on there a little bit. Yeah, even as you look at our cloud environment today, we have a number of elements defined on our public roadmap in terms of how to make these things better, especially for large, more complex scaled usage. The few that I've itemized here that I wanted to surface on this call, because there are a number. Our whole cloud roadmap is made available publicly, but things that I think many of you might be interested in are things like support for multiple IDPs within one Atlassian cloud environment. That's something that we should have coming out in the next few months, actually. It says Q1, Q2, 2022. These are calendar quarters. So sometime in the March to June-ish timeframe, that should be rolling out. Data residency for applications. So part of what we didn't touch on specifically, but usually comes up as part of an InfoSec review is, where does my data live for the core apps, for any add-ons or extensions we may be using as well. So we're going to provide additional capability on that within the next few months also. Specific functionality in Confluence for external collaboration. We can manage all of our users in our domain, but we have a lot of contractors or other people that we collaborate with outside of our organization. How can we activate that without having to give them corporate IDs and emails and things to use that? How can we instead include them directly? So external collaborators in Confluence, actually that's looking really close. It says Q1, we're already in February, end of Q1 is March, so soon, assuming that doesn't shift on the roadmap. Additional types of external user security for mandating things like 2FA processes and so on, same as you can already for your internal users. And probably the biggest one that I've seen from many of my customers in the APAC region, and this won't occur until the June to September-ish timeframe right now, but something that's called a selective user claim, which really speaks in particular to Atlassian Access, which, just to elaborate on that a little bit, right now, when you go to trigger management of all your users for your organization, it'll grab users that all have the same email domain. That's great if it's acme.com. If it's, bigorganization.co.jp or .co.I, or one of these like massive installations, and you're only in a department where you want to collect 200 users, but you're part of an organization that has 10,000, that gets tricky because right now you have to actually claim and manage 10,000. Later this year, we'll allow this selective user claim, so you can just start with that smaller environment and scale it out over time, even within one domain as part of that. So I know it's a bit of a rough cut. Hopefully it gives you enough of a sense of kind of what to expect within that migration window that we outlined earlier, because even though these aren't GA today, these are on our public roadmap, and it's a roadmap, so things might shift, but I've seen our product team, if they put something out there, it's usually pretty solid before they're comfortable putting that out there externally. So a lot to come. Those are the key ones, and just a little bit on access, but I wanted to leave time for some interactive Q&A as well too, Vishwa, because I haven't even opened the panel, which I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I think that selective users is very important, because I think one of the cases we encountered that problem because the few set of people were working on customer side, and then they were not able to basically log in, right? Because they don't have access. So I think that's a key feature, but I think let's get into the questions which are there. I think there are already many questions which I see in the panel. So I think one coming in is a very recurring question, which you will always be asked until you actually address that, is the data center in India. So I think a lot of our customers, typically in BFSI domain and all those areas, they are very curious on that roadmap.
Yeah. So the short answer is not yet. There's nothing on the internal or external roadmap on that. We do have additional data centers that we have posted out on our public roadmap that will occur. I can think of one that may or may not be on there, but it's not India. That's also in the APAC region. India has come up in the past. It is something that we prioritize internally. Obviously, we're prioritizing a number of regions for a lot of our customers globally. And just a level set for everyone too, since we run on AWS, in the APAC region, the centers where we currently spin up on our environment is in Sydney and Singapore. And so for the vast majority of customers, we can have that chat through how that'll work for them. You can guess to some of the other areas that have been requested and that we prioritize, right? Whether it's Japan or South Korea or India, these have all been floated as ideas, but I've not seen anything even on an internal roadmap that would surface this year. So for 2022, I don't think we're going to have anything new yet, certainly not India. As that changes, I'm be happy to give an update, but nothing really to share with you yet.
Yep, sure. So there are a couple of questions, a bit technical side on the JCMA. So can you just quickly touch upon some of the improvements which are being worked upon on JCMA side of it?
It says, is this the one that talks about plans, ways to save solution?
Yeah.
Okay. When we apply the errors occurred post-migration using JCMA in the plan itself post-completion. Yeah, obviously there could be a lot of permutations of this, so I don't know exactly what's happening. I would say for everyone here, the fact that that tooling still has a dedicated team that is pretty amazing in terms of how they've evolved that. It started off from basically a glorified export import tool to really doing a lot of work and heavy lifting and incorporating not only the core platform, but more and more of the add-on information as well. It'll help you assess a number of add-ons and attributes as part of that. So it's really become a full-fledged application in its own right. And it does still have a dedicated team with its own prioritized backlog off of that. I would be keen to know from that particular individual if there was a specific type of issue they were encountering, because it's software, it's not perfect, it can still be improved. If there's something in particular that we could check on to see whether it's in their backlog and or something we could help reprioritize with them, I'd be happy to proxy that back end, but nothing I can think of straight away.
Sure. So I think the Shubham has asked this question, so we can maybe get on one-on-one and understand a bit more on what exactly the challenges their team is facing. So another question is from Rajesh. You have your own cloud, or we had to use AWS Azure or any other for migrating?
Yeah, I was going to pick that one because that's a quick answer, right? Our SaaS environment, you sign up, we give you a URL. You don't even need to, I mean, it's good for you to know we use AWS, but you don't have to worry about AWS. You don't need your own AWS setup or subscription, or you don't touch those costs at all. That's kind of subsumed in what we provide to you. So you don't have to spin up anything outside of that.
Another question on the similar lines is differences between migrating on-prem to Atlassian Cloud or AWS Cloud.
Very different, right? Two different products. So as we've been talking about, when you go to move to the cloud, I think of that as a proper migration. Different products, different code lines, migration tooling, stuff breaks. We've all been through migrations before. When it's on-prem, when you're looking at, for example, moving from, let's say, JIRA Server to JIRA Data Center, in my mind, and this is a description I'll actually use with those customers, is I tend to liken that more to an upgrade than a migration, because you're leaving the data in place, usually, unless you choose to shuffle around things in your database. You can take a JIRA Server instance, you can apply a data center license, you can spin up one node and then build out multiple nodes to front end that and make it HA on-prem without changing anything else. You're just layering on new, in fact, you're not even necessarily layering on new bits, assuming you're on a recent version, you're just putting on a new license key that allows you to spin up multiple nodes. Now, of course, I'm oversimplifying it. There's some additional configuration and things that you have to copy, of course. It's not quite click a button, but you're not moving data around. You're not migrating. You're really doing things more in place, versus with the cloud, you're actually moving data into another environment.
So I think another one is for the from the billing perspective. So Atlassian I'll just answer that. So Atlassian do work with partner. So that's the preferred model, which is encouraged to customers to work with the partners. Scott, would you like to add anything on that?
Yeah, I'll just reinforce it. Nothing else to really extend off of that. Quite often we work with partners in a number of different parts of the region, and I would say that's probably your best initial starting point, whether it's for quotes as well as, again, some of the upfront analysis as we've talked about. I think starting with a partner is a smart move.
I think another questions which I think are similar nature is that the resources, if you are not using, can you disable it and enable it? So I'm not sure what kind of resources they are talking about.
Is this the billing one, Vishwa, or which one?
Yeah, the billing one, yeah.
Do you have a solution for tracking billing for every resource month to month? I don't use a resource. Can I shut it down and enable? I'm going to take a guess at what Hari means here, because I'm not 100% sure. So I'll apologize up front if I get it wrong. If this is about tracking how, like, let's say you're paying for 200 users and only 50 are ever really logging in. We do have in Access in our admin console the ability to track a lot of that utilization, to see in the audit log the frequency with which different users are logging in. We're extending that out so that you can actually see over time, and I'll have to double check the roadmap, but like how often they're logging in, what pages they hit, which add-ons they're using, like really getting a lot of information more and more on how, not if and when they're logging in, but actually how they're using the system, so that you can try to balance out how many users you actually need. If you're paying month to month, you can allow the user count to be a bit more lumpy. That gets a bit trickier if you're paying annually. So this will depend on your use case in terms of whether or not it makes sense for you. And again, to get across that fully, it's probably good to chat with an advocate either at Amroot or Atlassian just to help you walk through kind of what that looks like and what the actual cost advantages are depending on the levels and how much they may or may not fluctuate. Because even though your month may fluctuate, the annual cost does pre-bake in a discount. So if you fall within that discount margin, you're probably better off just paying and grabbing the discount up front. But we can walk you through mapping that out in a bit more detail.
Yeah. So I think we are running out of time. I'll just take this last one, which I am not sure if I fully understand. So do you follow same shared responsibility models as AWS follows?
Well, if by shared, you mean, do we run on top of that? We do, yes. We layer on that shared responsibility model. We make publicly available all the additional controls so that we can get to those certifications as part of that. And yeah, we have heaps of documentation on how that operates. So again, for those of you who've been through that, know how that operates, it kind of gives you a 75% level comfort factor on where we stand. And then those documents will get you the last 25%.
So there are a few more questions left, but in the interest of time, maybe we promise to reach out each one of you whose questions are not answered one-on-one. We will definitely try to answer. So thanks, Scott. It was really great chatting with you, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and I think the chat Q&A is still buzzing.
Yeah.
Sorry guys, I think we are short of time here, but we will definitely reach out and have more one-on-one discussion with you. Thanks everyone for joining this, and thanks Scott. It was always lovely chatting with you, and next time I'm sure we will get to meet you in person. So over to you, Abhijit.
Hey, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and efforts, audiences, for such a beautiful engagement and bang on questions to help your teams reach great ROI. Vishwa and Scott, as always, electrifying leaders. It indeed is a party listening to your insights. But let me take this opportunity and thank our outreach partners, UBS Forum. And as we promised, the disco meter really rocked the floor. And we are happy to announce, and this is going to be a secret. Let me come close. Don't share it outside because it's just for you guys, okay? So you just need to register yourself on the link that we have sent you before 15th of March and avail a support package with a discount up to 55%. Not only that, you can get your teams trained on JIRA, and we will issue a participation certificate from Amroot Software. So in case if you know more about the agenda, the syllabus, we have Vishwajit. You can just send us your questions on connect@amrootsoftware.com, and he'll be more than happy. And we all will be more than happy to engage with your teams and your organization. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Once again, take care, be safe, and be kind to yourself.
Yeah, and hope to meet you all soon.
All right, see you.
Thanks, Scott. See
Thanks,
you.
Scott.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.